If you've ever felt slightly annoyed when someone says they bought Bitcoin at $2,000, this video is for you, because there's a psychological trap hiding in plain sight in the Bitcoin world, and almost everyone falls into it. Not beginners, not traders, everyone. It's the moment when you compare your Bitcoin entry price to someone else's. Someone says, I bought at $800, another says, I bought during the 2018 crash. Someone casually mentions, I started accumulating in 2015. And suddenly, your perfectly rational investment decision feels inferior, even if you bought Bitcoin at 60,000 or 40,000 or, even just yesterday. Because the mind does something strange when it hears earlier numbers. It turns history into competition. And that's where the trap begins. Let me explain something important. Bitcoin is one of the only assets in the world where people feel embarrassed about buying something that is still historically early. Imagine someone saying, I'm upset. I only bought Apple stock in 2008 instead of 1998. It sounds ridiculous, but in Bitcoin, this happens every day because the brain doesn't evaluate value. It evaluates comparison, and comparison is poison for long-term investors. Your brain doesn't ask, is this asset valuable? It asks, did someone else get it cheaper? Which is a completely different question, and honestly a completely useless one. Think about it. If Bitcoin one day trades at $500,000, does it really matter whether you bought at 20,000 or 30,000 or 60,000? In the long run, those differences become statistical noise, but psychologically they feel enormous today, because humans anchor to numbers. Now here's the second layer of this trap. The stories you hear about early Bitcoin buyers are not the full story, because you usually hear from the winners, not the sellers, not the people who bought early and sold at $10 or $100 or $1,000. Survivorship bias plays a huge role here. The people who held through multiple cycles are rare, very rare. Holding Bitcoin through an 80% drawdown is not easy. Holding through 2 is even harder. Holding through 3 requires a completely different mindset, which means the real advantage isn't buying early. It's understanding the asset deeply enough to hold it. And that brings us to the uncomfortable truth. The biggest difference between early Bitcoin investors and late ones is not price, it's conviction. Early adopters often had stronger conviction because they had to. They bought when nobody cared, when Bitcoin was considered a joke, when exchanges collapsed, when media declared it dead every year. Their conviction was forged through chaos. But conviction isn't limited to time. You can develop conviction today through study, through understanding the monetary properties of Bitcoin, through understanding scarcity, through understanding the global liquidity cycle. Conviction is not inherited, it's built. And once conviction exists, entry price becomes less important. Now think about the opposite scenario. Imagine someone who bought Bitcoin at $1,000. Sounds amazing, right? But imagine they sold at $3,000 because they thought the move was over. Another person buys at $30,000 and holds until $300,000. Who actually wins? The entry price narrative collapses very quickly when you extend the timeline, because wealth in markets rarely comes from perfect timing. It comes from staying in the game long enough for asymmetric outcomes to play out. And Bitcoin is one of the most asymmetric assets ever created. But asymmetry only works if you hold. And holding only works if you understand what you own. This is why comparing entry prices is such a destructive habit. It distracts you from the only question that matters. Does the thesis still hold? Is Bitcoin still scarce? Is it still decentralized? Is global adoption still expanding? If the answer is yes, then the precise number you entered at becomes far less relevant over time. Now let me add a slightly uncomfortable thought. Sometimes the obsession with entry price is actually an ego problem. People want to feel like they were early, like they were smarter, like they saw something others didn't. And when someone else bought earlier, It threatens that identity. But markets don't reward ego, they reward patience. The truth is, Bitcoin doesn't care when you arrived. It only cares whether you stay. Every cycle brings new participants, new capital, new narratives. But the people who benefit the most are usually the ones who avoid psychological traps, and comparison is one of the biggest ones. So the next time someone tells you they bought Bitcoin at $500, don't feel regret, feel curiosity. Ask them how they held through multiple crashes. Ask them what they understood that others didn't. Because the real edge was never the price, it was the mindset. And the good news is mindset is still available for anyone, even today.